Hello and welcome to the latest in URM's series of webinars. Today we're going to be looking at SOC 2 audits and how to achieve a successful outcome. My name's Lisa Dargan, I'm a director at URM and I'm joined by Chris Hayes, one of our senior consultants who I will introduce to you in a moment. So let's start with the agenda. Just to make sure we're all on the same page and we all have the same understanding, we'll start with what is SOC 2 and then we'll look at some of the benefits. But the bulk of today, we are drilling into how do you ensure a successful SOC 2 audit outcome? What does that look like? What are some of the things you need to consider? How do you prepare? And we're going to be going through that in some detail. So before we start, just very briefly, for those of you that aren't familiar with URM, this year is our 20th birthday in June, so we've been established for 19 years, and we look to combine effectively a GRC approach alongside our cyber team and pull in our technical expertise, which is quite relevant particularly to SOC 2. The main area that we really focus in is around information security, and that includes the likes, those you may be familiar with this, of ISO 27001, CC+, and SOC 2 is a key part of that. And I think, Chris, it's fair to say we've probably worked a lot more on SOC 2 in the last 12, 18 months than we have done over the last few years.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
So we've got a lot of experience with SOC 2 that we will be addressing today during this webinar event. So let me introduce Chris. So I'm very fortunate today. Chris spends most of his time with clients and we have dragged him away from clients today to get him to share his experience on today's webinar. So Chris has got over 15 years of information security experience, and without trying to age him, 30 years of IT experience. Chris's specialisms include SOC 2, ISO 27001 and PCI. And just to put some perspective around it, Chris is a CISM and a CISA in addition, as well as a qualified PCI QSA. So Chris has got an awful lot of information security experience and brings that to SOC 2 to give you a very unique but pragmatic and appropriate view. So Chris, let's dive in, and just to make sure we're on the same page, because I know I personally get quite confused sometimes between 27 and SOC 2 and accreditation, compliance, certification, etc. So drilling in, what is SOC 2?
Yeah, so basically to start from first principles, organisations that receive services which involve the management, the processing of their data, understandably are quite keen to have some sort of assurance about the information security controls that those supplier organisations have in place. And essentially, SOC 2 has been put in place to provide some formalised assurance for client organisations to understand exactly what information security controls their supplier organisations have in place, and therefore how they're able to protect that organisation's information.
So let me just understand this. I know we're going to talk about scoping in detail, but in effect, if I'm delivering a service to a number of organisations, any of those might want that level of assurance from me as to, I suppose, the information security I have around that service. But typically it's about the service you deliver, potentially, as opposed to the whole organisation.
Yes, that's absolutely a key aspect. For those of you that have got some familiarity with something like ISO 27001, where generally the assumption is that you're going to utilise 27001 across your entire organisation, SOC 2 is very service based. So there's absolutely no issue or challenge in you as an organisation just looking to have a SOC 2 report for a single service, or maybe even having multiple SOC 2 reports for multiple services, but it is 100% service based, and that's a key thing to remember when we talk about the structure of the SOC 2 report and some of the evidence that you need to be delivering in this space.
Okay, and just so I understand, when you talk about the report, you don't get a certificate like you would do with 27001 or other standards. And do you provide your report, warts and all, to your clients? Is that kind of what it's there to do?
Yes, yeah. As a consultant, it's like I get sometimes a little bit grumpy with organisations when they start talking about what do we need to do to pass SOC 2. SOC 2 essentially is an auditing standard. So fundamentally, the output of a SOC 2 audit is a SOC 2 report, and you will always get a SOC 2 report, regardless of how mature or indeed immature the auditors find your controls and the evidence you have associated with those controls. Obviously, when that report comes out, that report can have a number of findings in it. It can be a very clean report, what we call an unqualified report, potentially with no exceptions in it, or it can be a report which either has exceptions in it, whereby it's talking about a particular area of control, I don't know, something like change management, and saying that the auditors couldn't evidence that you had an effective change management process in place. Or there's the concept of exceptions, which are more point issues around a particular control. So when they were looking at a sample of change records, they found one change record which didn't have, for example, testing information associated with it. So you always get a report coming out of it. Now, I guess there could be an argument that perhaps when you actually receive this report, it isn't something that you want to share because there's so many qualifications or exceptions in it. But you can't fail a SOC 2 audit.
Okay. And we'll just come on to reports. I will say, because a couple of people have raised it, as a question, the slides are available at the end of this webinar if you mark that on your feedback form. And if you have got questions, there is a little box where you can submit your questions. We'll look to address as many of those as we can during the webinar, but if not, we will follow up answers to questions afterwards. So who audits you, Chris? Is it your usual, is it the usual assessors that you expect to see, or you mentioned about being an accounting? Yes,
yeah. The history of SOC, and specifically SOC 2, is it's a North American based standard, and historically it came out of the area of accounting, whereby there was a recognition that, again, supplier organisations obviously have full financial accounts undertaken, but potentially there was seen to be a gap that when it got to the point of information security and controls, there wasn't an equivalent way of accrediting that. So essentially, that's what SOC 2 came in to fulfil that gap. And that basically means that the organisation that's going to audit you is going to be a CPA, so a Certified Public Accountancy Organisation in the United States. Okay, so, and just to understand this, just put this into context, it's typically, you'll be asked for if you work with US-based organisations or US-owned organisations. It's more typical to be asked, which is increasing from a supply chain perspective from a US client. Yeah, historically, and certainly how URM first got involved in this space was with organisations that were already based in the USA market, already dealing with the USA market, or wanted to deal with the USA market. So it's still true that in the majority of cases, organisations are looking to get a SOC 2 report because either their USA-based clients are requiring it, or they want to expand into the USA market. There is a caveat on that. I'm a big fan of SOC 2 and SOC 2 reporting generally, and it is seen as a really strong tool for getting that assurance from your suppliers. So lots and lots of organisations have in effect cottoned on to this. So increasingly we're seeing organisations in the UK and across Europe also putting SOC 2 reports in their lists of assurance material that they would like to see from their suppliers. So increasingly organisations, when they're talking to prospective clients even, are listing out ISO 27001, they may be listing out aspects of PCI. Increasingly, SOC 2 is also on that list.
Okay, And a question we've had, and this is where I get tongue-tied, so I will try and spit this out correctly. Somebody's asked, probably the link with financial and accounting, how does it interact with SOX, SOX, or is there any interaction?
There is a degree of, I don't know whether interaction's the right way of terming it. Certainly, if you've been subjected to SOX auditing, and then you experience a SOC 2 audit, it will look very similar. It's a very, very similar approach. And what I always say around this is it's coming out of the accountancy space. It's CPA organisations that are the auditors. So, surprise, surprise, the auditing approach they take is very like a financial audit, in terms of it's very evidence driven. Now, my SOX experience is a little bit in the past, but when you look at the controls that are required, and particularly the evidence that's required, there are a lot of similarities.
Okay, and so the key point that we need to bear in mind as we go through this, as you've said, it's not a certification but an attestation. You can't pass or fail, but the report is very detailed. For those of you that are 27 familiar, I would say think about your stage 2 report, but at least considerably more detailed. That is really a warts and all review of your controls. So, Chris, there's 2 types, isn't there? Just to add to this complexion, there's 2 types of reports.
Yes, yeah. Unfortunately, this is an area that sometimes causes a little bit of confusion, because in their wisdom, they've defined different types of SOC report. We're obviously only talking about SOC 2 today, but there is the concept of a SOC 1 report. But within SOC 2, there's the concept of a type 1 report and a type 2 report. And again, this is a really common question when organisations are new to the SOC 2 area. Sometimes when you look at it, it seems like a type 1 report is a jumping point, a stepping stone for type 2 report. So that essentially, as an organisation, you get your type 1 report and then you get your type 2 report. That's not really the purpose of the 2 types of report. Essentially, a type 1 report is a point in time report. So basically, the auditors are going to want to see documentary evidence of your controls, and then they're going to want to see that your controls are effective as of today, as of the day of the audit. So they're not looking over a period of time. A SOC 2 audit, a type 2 audit is exactly the same, but the auditors are going to be reviewing your controls and wanting to see evidence of effective operation over a specified period of time. 3 months as a minimum, 6 months is quite a common time frame for an initial report. So again, that's why people sometimes think, organisations sometimes think, well, it sounds like a type 1 audit is slightly easier, so let's do that first, and then let's do a type 2 audit. But in actual fact, the purpose of a type 1 audit is quite specific. It's there for the instance where you've got a requirement to actually have a SOC 2 report by a specified date, but your control framework has not been operating effectively for any significant period of time. So, for example, you've only just introduced a new service that you want to get certified, or indeed you're a new organisation. So it's not a stepping stone. It's there for that very specific reason of you need to provide to your clients a SOC 2 report, but you haven't been operating your controls for any significant period of time, and hence obviously can't evidence their effective operation over a specified period of time.
So if you needed to say, yes, we've got it established and went with a type 1, the next year and subsequent years, you would always go with type 2. You wouldn't, unless you've got a brand new service, or you wouldn't go back to a type 1. So if you do type 1 to address a specific time sensitive requirement, then you'd be forever type 2, wouldn't you?
Yeah. And the thing to remember about this as well is your SOC 2 report is going out to your clients. So if you've got a type 1 report, what you're implicitly saying is, we've got a great control framework, we haven't been operating for any significant period of time, so we can't actually evidence how great it is.
Yeah.
So it's definitely worth remembering that essentially you go for a type 1 report only in those very specific circumstances where essentially you have to go for it.
Got it. Okay. And actually, someone's asked a question about the trust service criteria, and we're just coming on to this. So within the control frameworks and within SOC 2, there's 5 trust service criteria or sets of controls, for one of a better description. Can you just walk us through those?
Yeah, exactly as you said. There's five trust service criteria: security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. Of those 5, the fundamental criteria is security. Security is by far the largest criteria, so it's got the greatest number of points of focus and hence controls associated with it, and it's covering all of those areas of organizational governance, control management, and the fundamental technical controls that you need to have in place. And I think the way to look at it is that mandatory trust service criteria is fundamentally the base of your SOC 2 report, and then the other optional trust service criteria are add-ons in effect. And the key thing to remember around this is it's not a concept of the more trust service criteria you have in your report, the better. The trust service criteria are based on what your service requires and what your client's expectations are. So, for example, if you're delivering a service which is software as a service, it's quite likely that availability is going to be something that your clients are going to be interested in. They're going to want to know that that service is going to be available 24/7 or whatever. So hence availability is a valid trust service criteria for your organisation. I have worked with organisations where for various reasons they've gone through all 5 trust service criteria, even though the service that they're delivering doesn't really warrant or doesn't really require all of the trust service criteria, and something like processing integrity isn't actually relevant to the service that they're delivering. And that means every year it's a little bit of a challenge to work out exactly what are we evidencing here for processing integrity. So the key aspect with your trust service criteria is the 4 optional trust service criteria is what's required by your service, which of those trust service criteria, availability, confidentiality, privacy, are relevant to the service that you're delivering. And then, as is always the case with SOC 2, what do your clients need? What are your clients expecting for all this?
And it's probably fair, it's really important and fair to point out, a lot of the time, your clients will be telling you which of the trust service criteria they expect you to have, won't they? And they will be saying, we would like to see SOC 2 Type 2 addressing these trust service criteria. So if you are initially doing this because you're starting to hear from clients saying, we want, it's a good idea to go, either we are thinking of doing security and availability to confirm, is that what you expect? To clarify that, because it is very much client driven. And one question we've had, Chris, which is worth addressing now, somebody asked, in a Type 2 audit, do they request evidence only during the audit period? For example, if it starts the 1st of April, do they only want evidence from the 1st of April, or are they looking backwards at the last 3 months, 6 months?
No, they are absolutely only looking at evidence from your defined reporting period. Yeah, I mean that's basically the answer. I have not come across any situation where the auditors, off their own back in effect, have requested evidence prior to the start of your reporting period.
Great. Okay. So just to finalise this area, who needs a SOC 2 report?
Sorry, can we just go back? I've got a really good example for that to answer that question. One of the areas that the auditors will ask for evidence of is if you've had any critical information security incidents. And you would only hope that most organisations are going to say, well, during our reporting period, we haven't had any critical information security incidents. So the auditors don't then subsequently come back and say, well, when was the last one? Let's go back and find your last critical information security incident. They will just say, well, if you haven't had any in the period, That's what we're going to write in the report. In the reporting period, there were no critical information security incidents.
Okay, so just let me understand this. So say your audit starts on the 1st of April, and early on you're asked about change management, as you highlighted, and they say, great, you said this is your change policy. I'd like to see a list of your last 20 change tickets. Is that only from the 1st of April,
Yes.
or does it go back beyond that?
No, and again, specifically, if you're, and let's be clear here again, when we say 1st of April here, we're saying 1st of April is the start of your reporting period. Yeah. You're going into your initial SOC 2 audit, and you're doing an audit for 3 months, say, initially. So that would be April, May, June, yeah. Obviously. Sorry, everybody. So April, May and June, they will just be looking at change records for April, May and June. Yeah. And in practice, what they will do for requests like that is they will say, give us a list of all of the change numbers that occurred from the 1st of April through to the end of June. We will then sample out of that. And like good auditors, they'll sample some from the start, some from the middle, yeah. Some from the end. Got it.
Okay. So going back, the SOC 2 report, who needs one?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer to this is any organisation where they've got current or prospective clients that are asking for a SOC 2 report. Yeah. Which, sorry, is slightly trite answer, but more generally, typically it's organisations that are supplying services that involve in some shape or form collection, processing, transmission, storage of their clients' information.
Okay, and somebody's also asked a question, which is, well, if we've got 27, can we just cross-reference and skip SOC 2 audit or do a manual review for SOC 2? And I am assuming from what you've said so far, a SOC 2 audit is far more detailed, far more in-depth, seeking evidence in a completely different way. So if someone's asked you for SOC 2, it is highly unlikely they are going to accept your 27 certificate.
Yeah. A SOC 2 report is fundamentally different. And for those of you that have seen a SOC 2 report, be it a SOC 2 report from a massive organisation like Microsoft, related to AWS services, or from quite a niche, smaller organisation, they've all got fundamentally the same structure. They are all very detailed reports. So yeah, typically, if your client is saying that they want to see a SOC 2 report, that is what they want to see, because it's a whole different level of tangible assurance compared to an ISO certification.
Okay, and you said that they're service based. So the report includes, we're going to talk about scope in a moment, but the report then talks about all the specific processes, controls, people, software, everything typically around that service.
Yes, yeah. And I guess you could argue it's sort of in two parts. It's absolutely all of again, everything you said, the teams, the people, the software, the systems that are utilised to deliver the service, but also it includes those supporting processes in the wider organisation. Just to give you a tangible sort of evidence, tangible sort of example of this, typically your SOC 2 auditors are going to want to understand things like how your organisation is governed. So they're going to want to understand how information about issues and incidents or control maturity are escalated up the organisation, how organisation objectives are cascaded down the organisation. So the way I always put it is that the auditors want to understand want to make sure that your service delivery isn't an oasis of mature controls in an organisation which is chaos. They want to understand the wider organisation as well.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And we've touched on some of these, but just to sort of wrap up the what is SOC 2 benefits. I mean, you are providing your warts and all report to somebody who has specifically requested it, that is going to detail your approach to your controls and the level of maturity. So number one is assurance on a different level to other reporting.
Yes, yeah. you could argue, if it's going to sound a bit scary, but with a SOC 2 audit and the resulted SOC 2 report, there isn't really anywhere to hide. Yeah, it's going to be very clear about what you do, and indeed, almost by exception, what you don't do if you've not got particular technical controls in place. And the auditors, as you would expect, obligated to clearly document all of the findings.
Yeah.
And that, again, go back to that previous example of your change tickets. If they've sampled, I don't know, a dozen change tickets, and they've identified one change ticket which doesn't have all of the information you say it should have in it, that will be articulated in your report as an exception.
Got it. Okay, no, that makes
which
sense.
is obviously why clients love SOC 2 reports.
And hence, and it is worth saying, from a cost perspective, there is a lot of time spent auditing this, irrespective if you've got quite a small scope, and it is effectively the same level of detail every year. It's not, for those of you that are ISO familiar, it's not, okay, I'm going to do maybe a third of the controls, for example, in year 1, the third year 2, third year 3. It's everything every year to the same level of detail.
Yeah, and again, just to be absolutely clear around this, you can go into your initial SOC 2 audit with a degree of flexibility of what your initial reporting period is going to be. So as I said, the audit organisations, 3 months is probably the smallest period, the best period, up to 12 months. Each year subsequently, your SOC 2 audit is going to cover 12 months.
So it's going to cover, when they come in, it's going to look at the last 12 months effectively. So it will, so to answer the question earlier, it might start on the 1st of April, but from a change perspective, if you finished on the 30th of June last year, it's going all the way back.
Yeah, and you'll be delighted, I'm sure you'll all be delighted to know that certainly organisations, clients in the States typically have got processes in place whereby they will come to you and say, right, well, we got a SOC 2 report from you, but it's 13 months old now, so can we see your latest SOC 2 report?
Yeah.
So they depending on the size and the complexity of those organisations, a lot of them will have proactive processes, so they will come knocking on your door.
Okay, and so we're going to move into key questions, but it's really important that people understand that a SOC 2 report is very detailed, provides a clear set of findings, provides an overview of your approach, and your technology infrastructure will reference the third parties you use. So there's a lot of detail in that. So bear that in mind as we walk through preparation, because it does obviously link back. So from the top, how do you scope it? Where do you start? How do you scope it?
Yeah, you do need to be clear about why are you doing this, and the key aspect around this is what are your client expectations. So you need to be clear on the services that require your SOC 2 report. You're going to need to be clear on exactly what your client expectations are around the trust service criteria, as we've already mentioned. And that helps you to define, okay, we've got a dozen services, but in actual fact, it's only these 2 services that have got clients that are interested in SOC 2, or that we're planning to potentially market to the United States.
Okay, so I know your favourite answer when we say, what's your scope? You say, it depends, but the key questions are, why are you doing it? Who requires it? And what services fundamentally are they going to be utilising?
Yeah, and I mean, I think probably all of you will expect this, but within the SOC 2 report, you need to be able to articulate your scope very, very clearly, so that clients picking up the report are absolutely 100% clear about what is and isn't included in the report. I think if any of you get an opportunity to see some of like the Microsoft SOC 2 reports, they are very specific. They go into exactly which of their products are included in the specific SOC 2 report. And likewise, when you look at SOC 2 reports from data centers, you will find that they're very, very specific about these are the data centers that are included within our report.
Okay, So scoping wise, be really clear on why you're doing it and therefore what needs to be included. The last thing you want is you've had a couple of clients go, we expect to see a SOC 2 report, you've decided that you're going to invest in that, and then you haven't included the services they're looking at, or we've seen before, okay, I get service X and Y from you, I'm thinking I'm going to include Z in the future, they'll expect to see Z. And likewise, if you said, they've probably told you based on the service what trust service criteria what they're expecting to see. Okay. And then you've sort of touched on this, but during the audit, what are they actually auditing?
Yeah. Again, to go back to the thing we said about the fact that it comes out of the accountancy space, so it is absolutely evidence driven. So I think we touched on this in a later slide as well, but essentially what the auditors are wanting to see is documentation which specifies what you do, be that policy process documentation. And once they've seen that, they want to see evidence of that you are actually doing what you say you do. To give the evidence that you're providing to them context, they're going to want to clearly understand the infrastructure that you've got in place, the software that you've got in place, how your organization is structured in terms of departments and teams, and also, very importantly, what third parties you're utilizing that are responsible for delivering particular controls for you. All of this, it's not going to surprise you, you have to document within your SOC 2 report. There are sections in the system description, which is a standard part of the report, where you have to detail particularly the infrastructure that is supporting your service, the third-party software and indeed internal software that is supporting the service, the departments and teams and what they're doing around the service. And there's quite a detailed section where you have to specify not all of your third parties. That would be probably be an endless job, but the third parties that are delivering particular controls for you. And the easiest example to specify here, which is really common on SOC 2 reports, is the data centers where your infrastructure is hosted.
Got it. Okay. So, and then does your assessment include, like, is the assessor going to go to that third party and ask for evidence, or is this back to supplier management and how you're managing them and the contract you've got in place and SLAs and audits you've done of those? That's
a really good question, because it ties into one of the key concepts of SOC 2. Essentially, if you're an organization that's in the middle of a supply chain, so you're delivering services to clients, but you've also got suppliers that are delivering services to you, your clients are going to be requesting SOC 2 reports from you. So common sense would sort of say, for your key suppliers, you're requesting SOC 2 reports from them. So to answer the question and to use the example I just mentioned around the data center, a supplier of data center services to you, ideally what you're going to want is to have that data center having their own SOC 2 report. Because essentially what that means is within your report, you can say, right, this data center hosts our infrastructure, so is responsible for all of these points of focus in SOC 2 around physical security of infrastructure and the like. And look, they've got a SOC 2 report, and this is how they evidence the fact that they're delivering these controls appropriately. So, and I haven't answered your question, I realise. The answer is no. Okay. And sorry if you've forgotten what the question was. It's the auditors aren't drilling into your suppliers at all. They're wanting to see how you assure the services that are being delivered by your suppliers.
So it's old-fashioned supply management more than anything.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've talked quite a lot about you describing your system, and so in terms of the audit itself, you have to articulate to your assessors and what your system description is. Is that the scope? Are they one in the same?
Yeah, to a degree. Again, for all of you that have already seen a SOC 2 report, it follows a standard structure. And one of the key aspects of it is the system description. The system description is your responsibility as the organisation that's being audited, and in that description, what you're doing is you're documenting the services that you deliver.
Yep.
You're then to go back to what we were talking about previously, you're then documenting the infrastructure, the software, the teams in your organisation that are delivering that service. So you're doing all of that, but also it's the system description is your opportunity to articulate the ethos of your organisation, the culture of your organisation, and how you practically implement that culture as well. So it's sometimes I worry a little bit that organisations are so concentrated on the actual audit process and delivering all of the evidence that the auditors request that they look at the system description as like a bit of an overhead that they do at the end. It essentially is the section of a report where you can sell your organisation, and obviously specifically the control framework that you utilise for delivering your services.
So it's really important. This is actually really important. I know we've had this conversation before, how clients have documented their scope. Yeah, I've got these controls, and this is a bit of a lastminute.com, but this is this is something your clients will go to as well. This is your absolute, this is your shop window before you then look at all your controls, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think one of the other aspects of this is the audit organisations are very helpful, very proactive. So quite often they will provide a template for the system description, which again is obviously really useful, and it does give you a kickstart to this. But it is your system description, and as I said, it is your opportunity to show your organisation in the best light possible. Especially when you think about it, you're providing this report to your key existing clients and potential key clients as well. Yeah. So yeah, the system description is a key aspect, and I think it's organisations should ensure that they put time aside to actually get as good a system description as possible.
Okay, and we've had a question on this as well, and I don't want to confuse the world completely with type 1, type 2, type 3, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, but is this a publicly available document? So if you've done, we're talking specifically at the moment about SOC 2, either type 1 or type 2, is that do you make that a publicly available document? On Microsoft, I put it on my website, or is that something slightly different?
No, it's not a public document. And again, it's a really good question. It's a key aspect. And in actual fact, there's a section of the SOC 2 report where the auditors talk about what they've done and what their findings are. And within that, they're very, very specific about who you can share the report with. And essentially, it is current clients, prospective clients, auditors, and other interested stakeholders. But it absolutely is not something that you can stick on your website, put a link on your website to. There is a, not to confuse people, but there is a concept of a SOC 3 report, which is a public document. In truth, I've not ever come across an organisation actually getting a SOC 3 report as well. Yeah. So it's absolutely there for something that you share with very specific stakeholders.
Okay, and the question that we had is, is it always SOC 2? Should it be SOC 1? Should it be SOC 3? You've touched on SOC 3. Is SOC 1 the same thing?
No, SOC 1 is very specific. SOC 1 is an audit that you are required to do if you are delivering services that could fundamentally impact the financial reporting of your clients.
Okay, so if you're not doing, if you're not delivering financial software, for want of a better description, you're doing SOC 2, and then we're focused on, is this first time, some of my controls are new, type 1, or is this ongoing type 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just to put everybody's mind at rest, the concept of SOC 1, you don't really have to worry about. Your clients will be very, very clear with you if there's a requirement for you to provide them with a SOC 1 report, because essentially their auditors will be telling them that they need to see a SOC 1 report.
Makes sense, right. We've referenced this a few times, and this is something I think I get really confused about, so it'd be really helpful. How SOC 2 differs from 27001. So if I take 27001 and break it down, I've got my management system, my framework that effectively says how I do information security, and then I've got a set of controls. Now, prior to this, I thought SOC 2 was either specifics on how to implement the controls or more controls, but you've talked about governance, which is kind of bits of the framework. So where does it sit?
Yeah, there is a huge overlap between SOC 2 and 27001, and fundamentally, if you've already got an ISO 27001 certification, you're a long way to being in a space where you're ready for a SOC 2 report, a SOC 2 audit rather. The SOC 2 auditors want to see that you've got a control framework in place. They want to see that you're managing that control framework in some way, i.e. that you've got something akin to an ISMS in place. And yes, so there's absolutely an overlap between the two. SOC 2 is broader in that I always pick out three specific areas that it's broader. It's broader in terms of wanting to see evidence of organizational governance, to the extent of wanting to see that you've got board meetings and what the agenda of those board meetings are, that type of thing. It wants to understand what the communication structures are, both within the organisation and externally. It goes into this in a lot more detail than ISO 27001 does. And the third key area is it's much more interested in the whole life cycle of HR. For those of you that know ISO 27001, there is a section on HR controls, but it sort of cherry picks some very, very specific areas. Essentially, SOC 2 wants to understand how you manage your staff throughout the life cycle. So it wants to understand how you performance manage your staff. It wants to understand how you recruit staff. It obviously wants to understand some of the things that ISO looks at as well. So there's that aspect of it, but SOC 2 is a broader scope, and sometimes that sort of trips up organisations, because they're thinking, hey, we're going to go into this where we've already got ISO 27001, we're sorted. There are these additional areas. The other key, and sorry to keep on banging on about this, but the other key difference is the level of rigour and the fact that it is so evidence driven. You can have an ISO 27001 certification in good standing and quite comfortably get through your surveillance audits. But then when a SOC 2 auditor comes along and says, right, for this 6-month period, I'm going to want to see evidence that your processes have been operating effectively and uniformly, if there is such a word, over that period. So quite often when organisations start to prepare for SOC 2, ISO 27001 certified organisations start preparing for SOC 2, they identify the areas where they go, well, we've got a good policy and process in this space, and we can cherry pick good examples from particular teams or particular instances of this control, but we're slightly nervous that in actual fact we're doing it for the whole expanse, the whole scope of the control.
Got it. Okay, and it's probably fair to say a SOC 2 scope will be more restrictive, tighter, smaller, being service-based than a typical ISO scope. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Right. We've talked about this it's come up quite often, and we've talked about evidence, and we've got a question that says, I'm doing SOC 2 Type 2. I start on the 1st of April. Who decides whether they want to see 3 months, 6 months, 12 months evidence? Is that for me to go, I'm only going to provide you with, or does your assessor tell you?
That's a conversation you have with your audit organisation. there's only a certain number of options here, and in my experience, the typical options are 12 months, which is the ideal situation, 6 months or 3 months. Basically, you have a conversation with your auditors, you explain why you think realistically we could probably only do 3 months initially, or 6 months or whatever. So it's a conversation you have with your audit organization. Now, obviously, when the audit's completed, you've got your report. A report that is for 3 months isn't as impressive as a report for 6 months, isn't as impressive as a report for 12 months. But generally, client organizations understand that SOC 2 is a big deal, that it is a rigorous audit. So they understand that if you're going into getting your first audit, that you might be doing a slightly restricted timescale. So
but thereafter 12 months, 12 months, 12 months. Okay.
Yes,
And what evidence do they expect to see? Do they say, am I just showing them my policies? Am I showing here's my established process?
I think the auditing, well, I know the auditing process has evolved over the years, and from my experience, the most typical approach audit organizations take to the audit is that essentially they deliver to you a list of evidence requests, which I think everybody needs to be prepared. It is quite a scary list in that it will be potentially hundreds of individual requests there, some of which overlap, some of which you can provide the same evidence, but
hundreds. So if they said I want to see 10 change requests, you're not including that in your hundreds, are you?
No.
That's then a subset of your hundreds.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if you're going, sorry, this is scaring everybody, but if you're looking to get, you're doing a SOC 2, your initial SOC 2 audit for a 3-month period, and you're including security, confidentiality, and availability in there, then you're going to have between 100 and 200 evidence requests potentially, depending on how the auditors exactly how the auditors manage it. But it's that type of approach, and that's because what they're wanting to see is policy and process documentation, obviously the stuff that says what you do. Then they're wanting to see reports, they're wanting to see screenshots, they're wanting to see records to evidence your effective operation of those controls. To caveat slightly what I've said there, certainly when the auditors do their initial audit of your service or services, they don't know huge amounts about what your technical architecture is like, how you manage access and things. So they're going to come in with a fairly vanilla set of evidence requests. So for access management, potentially they will come in and say, okay, give us access lists for your network, for your operating system, for your database, for your application. Lots of organizations will go, that's nonsense. We only have, essentially, we manage it as one big thing. And so essentially when we provide our access lists, that's access lists for all of the different levels of the service architecture. So there is absolutely that aspect, but you will get that big old list of as I said, 100 plus, 100 to 200 evidence requests. Now it might be, but when you actually look at that, in actual fact, you are able to provide exactly the same evidence for half a dozen of those individual requests. So that's just a caveat back to so that you don't have everybody doesn't have nightmares.
And then you provide this evidence. So it's not up to me to decide what evidence I want to be provided. I'm going to be told, and I provide this evidence. And if we go for change, that's an easy one. I've given them my change management policy. I've maybe given them meetings of the change request board. I've given that. But then they could or will, which one could or will, come back to me and say, right, change requests, I can see that you've done 100. I want to see 3, 9, and 26. Is that like? Is that another layer?
Yeah. So essentially, what they will do, certainly with a Type 2 audit, is they will ask for all of the evidence that we've already articulated. For particular areas, so areas like change, what they will want to do is get a population of records, and then they will sample from those records. So again, in the example of change management, they will say, give us a list of all of your change requests over your reporting period, and then they will then sample from that and say, right, we want to see the detail for these particular records. Now, as they do this, as they look at all of this evidence related to change management, if it all makes sense to them, there's no little idiosyncrasies that you've got in your process, the records that they review all match up to what you say should be in the records. There's no inconsistencies there. They could look at all of that. They don't put a tick in a box, but essentially they could then say, right, change is done. You've given us the evidence. We're happy with the evidence. We've got nothing to say about that. So unlike an ISO auditor, where typically the auditors, for the controls in scope of your audit, the auditors are going to want to discuss the particular areas. They're going to want to have interviews for each of the control areas they're covering off. Certainly, traditionally, that's the way it's worked. It's quite possible for large areas of the evidence that you deliver, and I think you would hope that this will be the case. The auditors will look, your evidence is good. We don't actually have to ask any questions about that. The counter to this is, obviously, if you've got evidence which isn't consistent, or you're delivering something, a particular control in a very specific way, the auditors might drill down into that. And as soon as they identify an inconsistency, so again with your change records, they're going to be a little bit like a dog with a bone to a certain extent, in terms of they're going to really want to understand why there's those inconsistencies there.
Got it. So, and when you talk about inconsistencies, this sort of links to an exception. So when's an inconsistency an exception, and when's and vice versa?
Yeah.
And what do you do if you get one? Can I annotate the report, or can I give a reply? How does that work?
So again, let's stick with the change management thing. We look at the change requests, sorry, the change tickets. There's one change record that doesn't have the testing information on it. So initially, the auditors are going to say, right, we found an exception here. They will tell you that they found an exception, and they'll want to discuss that exception with you. Although the auditors are very detail driven, and it is a tough audit, they want you to not have exceptions. So they're only going to raise exceptions if they're absolutely 100% this exception. So in this particular case, they will come back to you and say, well, we've got this change record. There's no testing information against it. If you can explain and provide a justification for why that particular change record doesn't have testing information against it, the auditors might get to a point and go, actually, that all makes perfect sense. We're happy with that. They might then say you need to document that in your process and be more specific about it. But yeah, so the key with exceptions is don't panic. Don't just accept the exception. Review it, understand it, and be sure yourself that it's an exception. As I said, the auditors will definitely have these conversations, and you're quite entitled to push back on the auditor and go, it's not an exception because of this or because of that. And I've certainly had multiple examples of this where the auditors have subsequently said, no, that's a fair point. It's not. But if at the end of all of this, there isn't a reason why this particular record hasn't got testing information associated with it, it's going to go on your report as an exception. They will say, we reviewed 12 change records. One of those change records didn't have all of the required information. It's an exception. At the bottom of the SOC 2 report, you as an organisation have the ability to explain why the exception was there and explain why in the future that won't occur, what you're going to do to change your processes. So yeah, the answer is you do have the ability to push back.
Got it. Okay. And we've talked, I think we've gone through a lot of detail walking through this in terms of the level of detail they're going to, how focused you need to be. So in terms of audit planning, what are your key takeaways? I've got an audit coming up. What are the key things I need to be doing?
Yeah, you have to accept that the audit is going to be a significant exercise for you. It is going to require significant resource. you need to work with your audit organisation to be very clear about what the timeframes are, when they're going to give you your evidence requests, when they want those evidence requests to be delivered back to them. Lots of the audit organisations are quite helpful in that what they'll do is they'll give you specific points, and they'll say, right, we want 50% of the evidence by this point, we want 75% of the evidence by this point, because obviously it's in their best interest to make sure you're actually delivering this. So be clear on when the field work starts and finishes. Be clear on who you need in your organisation to be providing this evidence. What technical subject matter experts are going to need to be providing the evidence. Make sure they understand what the timeframes are and exactly what they need to be evidencing. And also, I think, work out how you're going to manage this. So are you going to work on the basis that the subject matter experts know their processes? So basically, they're going to deliver the evidence. You're not going to have like a validation process, a sense check of the evidence. Or are you going to work on the basis that your compliance team or whatever are going to collect all of the evidence, do a sense check of it, and then provide it to the auditor? So working out how you're going to do that, and also obviously make sure you've got someone tracking progress, make sure you've got someone managing issues. What you don't want is, again, let's use the change management team, a change management as an example. The change management team get the evidence requests, they've got an issue or a concern about it, so basically they just sit on their requests and don't do anything about them. You need to understand whether there's issues and whether some evidence can't be delivered, or whether there's questions about evidence.
Yeah, so I think fair to say, because I'm conscious we're approaching the end, make no mistake, this is a detailed process, seeking evidence and really lifting everything up to prove that you're doing it. So it's a significant undertaking for you as an organisation. It likewise has a cost associated with it that, if you're more 27,001 familiar, will be a surprise to many of you. Finger in the air, double the cost of your initial probably assessment on an annual basis. However, there's this real value in the level of detail this goes to, which then ideally means that your clients don't need to come and audit you themselves because of the level of detail this report goes to. So be very clear that this is hugely valuable to you as an organisation to demonstrate your strengths to your clients. But if you are a client of a supplier, this is a huge value to you to get real eyes on what your client's approach to information security is and the controls they have in place. To wrap up, how can we help you? We often get told or asked by people, how can you help us? We're looking at SOC 2. Starting point for most organisations is to do, first of all, start with a scope, and we can help you define your scope, what the appropriate trust service criteria are, and what the reporting period is, which will likely potentially define at day one your initial report. We can help then do a gap analysis, get a real understanding of where you are against SOC 2, what your likely position is, and where you need to improve.
And sorry, just to reiterate that, we understand the types of evidence that's required, so we can almost act like a pseudo auditor and say, right, you do realise that for your reporting period you're going to need to provide this change management evidence. Are you confident that you can? Have your issues around being able to deliver that evidence?
And that's another, typically then we can either help you with just defining that evidence or doing a pre-assessment, have you got, which might be a high level walkthrough, but to make sure you're in the right place. We can help you with that system description, and for many clients we help support the SOC 2 audit during the evidence gathering. Specifically from the webinar, so that you walk away from this and go, actually, that was really useful, what do I do now? We've got a webinar offer, both in terms of a half-day workshop for defining your scope, the TSC and the reporting period, or a half-day workshop reviewing and validating your system description. As we said, this is your window to your clients. This is your opportunity to really put your best foot forward. Upcoming events, we've got penetration testing or automated tools. What makes sense for your organisation? Business continuity exercising, particularly relevant after the Heathrow incident of last Friday and last weekend. how to achieve 27001 certification, and looking at GDPR specifically for small and medium enterprises. What does that look like? Chris, massive thank you to you for your time. It's been really interesting. Please do complete your feedback form, as I said at the start. If you would like a copy of the slides, please put that on your feedback form, and anything else. We shape our webinar program based on your feedback, so please do give us your feedback. Thank you all for attending. Bye-bye.